What's up, everyone? Today we're going to be taking a look at this species, which, if you don't already know, is called Yaupon Holly. I didn't have any inclination of what this species was until I started talking to a good friend of mine, who you might know, Jonas Dupuis of Bonsai Tonight. And he actually has a show quality Yaupon Holly that he's been working on for probably 20 years now. These guys are cuttings that came off of some trees in Texas and also from, well, I guess I should say they either came off of a tree in Texas, or they came from some nursery stock that I bought a while back. So in working with Yaupon Holly, there's some really nice characteristics here that I really like. It's a broadleaf evergreen, so it's always going to have leaves on it. And those leaves are nice and small. They have a really nice coloration. They're shiny, and they just sort of have a really great way of making tight, dense foliage pads. And there's probably a lot more to it, but I'm sort of a beginner with this species. And I'm coming at it from the angle of really wanting to explore, how do I use these for making mame and shohin trees? So the first thing that I did was start propagating so that I had a lot of trees to work with, to experiment on. And the results so far have been kind of interesting. I don't know if you can see. This one actually has like this weird kind of base to it, just like a giant sort of callus kind of thing. I'm not sure whether that'll actually like pan out into a good looking base for the tree, because I suspect that some of it is callus tissue. But for the time being, I'll just let it go. Now, the question with these guys is, how do you get one that has a good sized trunk and has some movement in it? And so if I start by kind of demonstrating here a little bit of wiring, I can let's start with this one. I can show you one of the real downsides of this as a species. So I'm going to just wrap this wire up this branch, and then I'm going to try to bend this branch. Now, this branch is smaller than, say, the pine trees that I was working on a couple weeks ago. And you can see that even with slight bends, I'm creating little cracks in the branching, and it's relatively easy. You can see this one's actually been split off and is kind of healing. So the question becomes, is wiring even a valid technique for working on this type of plant? And if you can't wire, can you really make a good bonsai? But what I found was that if I, instead of trying to wire branches that already have some wood to them, if I really go after the more herbaceous or fresh growth, that I can actually put some relatively good movement in it. And now, this is not without a little bit of danger, as with the older growth, but it definitely has the capability of creating some more interesting shapes using wire. The other thing I can do, obviously, is just sort of cut it back and do clip and grow. They definitely respond even when I have cut every single leaf off and I can't see a node or anything like that on the branch. Every one that I have cut back has leafed out basically right next to where I cut it, and that means that it is a really good species for bonsai. It's also used as a hedge, and that's always kind of a good clue if you're trying to find a species to use for bonsai. If it can be hedged, that usually means that it can be bonsai. It doesn't mean that it'll be a good bonsai, but it means that it can have good density, and that's one of the things that we're definitely looking for with a broadleaf evergreen like this. I kind of compared these to boxwood, except for whatever reason, I really like them a lot more than boxwood. And so I'm gonna go through a flat of them and see how much success I have with just sort of wiring, clipping back, and giving some character to these little starter plants. Let's use this as one of our subjects, and you can see that this is maybe a little bit smaller than a pencil. Definitely, this is 3mm aluminum, so it's a good, big enough size trunk that it's going to have a significant amount of wood in it, at least for Yaupon Holly. If this was a pine, I would have no problem bending it. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to use 2 strands of 3mm aluminum spaced apart to see if I can actually get a bend in this. All right, so rather than putting these right next to each other, I've actually kind of spaced them out. I could probably put even a third one on there, but the point of doing this is that having a piece of wire that, like when I make the bend, having the wire on the outside of the bend, which just gives me more of a chance of that happening, means that it's less likely to completely split apart. So just like I was expecting, a pretty good split already right there. And I don't think that'll kill the plant. So I'm just going to continue going with it. I'm not going to continue bending that section. But what that did effectively is take a straight section and give it a little bit of a curve. If this heals over and it doesn't just bud back from down here and give up on this whole section, then I've actually a mission accomplished. Now just split right here at the junction, partial split. And as I'm bending this, I can feel, it's almost like the wood fibers kind of split the bark outward. Now here, I'm guessing this is not going to live because it looks like it's completely ringed itself. I'll leave it alone, but most likely that branch is going to die and back bud in here. Now, if you twist with, especially with some species, if you twist while you are bending, it sometimes gives you a better shot of not completely splitting a branch. But even with minor twists and bends here, I'm seeing splits in the bark, so I'm not sure that's really going to work. All right, that's all I'm going to do to that one. Let's move on to some more. Whenever you're wiring a trunk, especially for the first time, don't assume that you can see the whole trunk above. You need to go down into the soil and find the junction with the beginning of the major roots, and even potentially correct the roots so that you have your entire trunk under control and you don't end up with a straight section at the base of it. I ran out of 2mm shiny aluminum, so I'm using this darker colored. All right, now in this case, because there's already a bit of a turn here in this direction, I'm not going to try to bend this up. I'm either going to try to bend it away from the camera, towards the camera, or down. Down's going to be problematic just because the pot is in the way, but I'm going to twist it a little bit, and hopefully not completely break it. Okay, so I bent it up, but I meant here. Broke that piece. And even just a little bit of movement is enough to distinguish the plant from just completely boring and straight to potentially being interesting. Now, this size twig is much more flexible, so I can kind of twist and bend. I'm really not too concerned about smashing leaves or anything like that. I'm also going to cut back these shoots that I didn't wire because I don't want them taking over and getting too strong compared to the rest. One more down. Now this one's kind of interesting because it's really small and it looks like it was either broken here or I previously tried to wire it and cause that damage. So let's just take a little wire here. And I'm going to go and just put a little bit of movement in this new shoot, which is going to make it a heck of a lot easier to bend. And I guess this will be a good demonstration of how flexible the tender shoots can be compared to the woody shoots. You can see I can get pretty much any bend in that I want. There's just no wood snapping or splitting the bark because the branch is still really young. In the older plants that I used to initially propagate these, this was a pretty common pattern of growth. So kind of coming up at an angle and then other branches coming up at other angles. So just like with the others, I want to initially try to put a little bit of a bend at least in this main section. Much better. And really just that one hook bend there is perfect. I can work with everything else, just doing clip and grow. I'm actually not going to cut the shoots off on that one. I'm just going to be happy with that. It didn't even really split, even though I did smash down this shoot. Not going to worry about that right now though. Now this is a good example of one that was already wired some time ago, and it's kind of hard to see, but you basically, the trunk starts down in here, and then there's a wired section that comes up like that, sort of making for the beginnings of a nice little small tree. And all of these shoots that are coming off of it are spaced apart and reasonably straight. I'm actually not going to wire this again. I'm just going to stick it back in the flat to grow for a while longer. All those branches might come off later, or I might cut back to one of them. But just having that one curved section to cut back to later is kind of what I'm looking for at this stage. Pretty good split right there. Don't forget when you're putting movement into young plants to give it more three-dimensionality. You don't want just like an S curve. You want some movement in both, not just back and forth, but sort of, and not a corkscrew either, but just some interesting curves and movement. And, you know, don't worry about the exact movement. You have to kind of worry about the scale of it. And, you know, so this ends up wanting to be a tree that's at least 5 or 6 inches tall. You know, you might end up cutting back down into here and making a smaller 3-inch tree, or growing it out to be a large tree. The tighter the curves, the smaller the tree you can make. See the spider? Little teeny guy. All right, well, this one's obviously definitely been wired for a while, and that gives me a little bit more to work with. I could leave all these shoots straight, but as long as I'm giving you guys examples, I'm going to come in here and just kind of snip these guys so that it's just like kind of like clip and grow. I don't know that I'll even need a shoot this low, but coming in and adding some movement by forcing the tree to go to a side bud or back budding will change the pattern slightly, and that makes it more interesting. Now, beyond the movement that I have in this section, up in here, there's not really any point in me cutting this back. I can just use this as a sacrifice branch and plan on cutting back into this, plan on cutting it off here or even down closer into here, something like that. So I'm going to leave all of this growth on to drive wood production down through the rest of the trunk. Honestly, I don't know how I ended up with a flat where only half of them were wired, but c'est la vie. I mean, this is just kind of a perfect example of what we're trying to avoid here. I mean, this is perfectly straight, and then I do like the angles that they form between the mame and that. So it's like, I don't know, maybe a 70-degree angle on this side and 110 on this side, but it has like a little bit of a gentleness to it that actually is workable. But the straightness, the natural straightness of the branching just needs a little bit of coaxing, I think, in order to create something that's interesting enough to work with as a bonsai or as the base part of a bonsai composition. Probably gonna break this. Oy. Oh, man, it's really stiff. Okay. And then I'm just gonna bend this to give it a little bit of movement, and kind of going the other direction, collapsing that angle a little bit. I gotta go past 90. Hopefully that branch will live. I don't think it's gonna live. We'll see. Still got wood and cambium on this side attached, but that's not looking really. It's not looking really promising. It was too deep in the pot, that's why I took it out. So I'll put a little bit of extra soil underneath as I pot it back in. Now, if I caught them all at this size, it would be a lot easier to get a little bit of movement in them, but I think it's still running the risk of cracking. No cracks. Oh! All right, well, that's a flat of Yaupon Holly wired. As you can tell from watching me go through them, it's not exactly easy to wire them, even when they are smaller than pencil size. And so I think, catching the young cuttings when they're really tiny is a good way to get some movement in them. Otherwise, cutting them back to just like a little stub and working with the sprouts that come out can be another good sort of strategy for getting yourself started in terms of creating a trunk. If it wasn't for the other great characteristics, this would really turn me off to working with them. But I really kind of enjoy the texture of the leaves and the way that they look when they start to build a little bit of density. If you enjoy working with Yaupon Holly and have been successful with making a good bonsai out of one, share it in the comments below. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.